Eruvin, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Yud, the last Mishnah in the first chapter of Eruvin. In our last Mishnah, we talked about the idea of Mekifin Bishlosha Chavalim. We saw this picture that talked about the idea that you can surround the area. We were talking about a shayara. You can surround the area with rope, and that would be enough. Now, if you recognize, you see that the rope really only goes, even though it's held up by reeds, by these staffs, by these sticks, it really only goes in one direction. Okay, it only goes, it only covers one level. There's no grid here. The grid is called Sheti ve'arev, Shti ve'arev, not Sheti, Shti ve'arev, which means it's those are the terms we use when in weaving. Shti ve'arev means the weaving of the different directions. So here in our case, okay, we talked about Shlosha Chavalim. In the Shayara, remember the Bartunera said we were talking about a Shayara, that the Shayara means a group that got stuck in the wilderness, then you could use the Shlosha Chavalim. So now our Mishnah is going to continue to talk about when can you use in one direction, and when do you have to have a lattice work area. So a lattice work, a boundary, border for your area. Says the Mishnah, Mekifin b'kanim. So not only can I use the ropes as we saw, I can also use kanim. Let's go to the other file that I found. Okay, Mekifin b'kanim. That's called shti. So the other one's called arev. So these are kanim. So instead of I don't just have to use the ropes. That's I guess arev. Okay, because the other one is shti. I don't have to use that. The Mishnah says I can do the shti also. I could use just a bunch of reeds as long as they're all within 3 tfachim of each other. That's good enough as well, and I don't have to connect them. That's what we said. As long as there isn't a distance between the kanim of 3 tfachim, so then we apply the principle of lavud. So now the question is, of course, when does this apply? That's going to be a machloket, a 4-way machloket between the Tanaim. Bashayara dibru, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that only applies in the case of a shayara. I mean, this is a special kula, a leniency that Chazal allowed for. Okay, for a shayara, because there's an exigency, there's a special need. So therefore, the Chachamim said that you're allowed to do the one direction. You're allowed to do the one direction. Let's read the Mishnah. We'll see all 4 positions, and then I'll show you a chart. Hopefully that will make it clear. So Rabbi Yehuda says b'shayara dibru. That's a shayara. The Chachamim said lo dibru b'shayara ela behoveh. So sometimes the Mishnah, remember, said the Mishnah before 2 Mishnah ago. The Mishnah before said a shayara. So sometimes when it says shayara, does that mean only shayara? Or do they talk about a shayara because that's normally the situation in which you'll find yourself, which you're going to build a temporary mechitza. So the Chachamim say in this case, no, this doesn't have to only be a shayara. It's lo dibru ela behoveh. They spoke about the applicable case, but it doesn't just apply to a shayara. On the other hand, next opinion, kol mechitza she'eno shel shti v'shel erev, any mechitza that isn't shti and erev, meaning the lattice work, eina mechitza. Divrei Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. So we had Rabbi Yehuda above. Now Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, so Rabbi Yossi, his son, said, I disagree with my father. I think that any mechitza that doesn't have both the shti and erev in both directions, the top and the bottom, okay, the up and down and the sideways, ain't a mechitza. That's not a mechitza. So says Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim omrim, and the Chachamim say, this is another Chachamim, echad mishnei dvarim. You only need one. So when the word is going on, you have a 4-way machloket, but it's very unclear who says what. So in order to understand this, we'll have to have the Rabbanan. Okay? Ika bein Rabbanan kamai le Rabbanan batrai. So what's the difference between the first Rabbanan and the second? The Rabbanan kamai lo sharu liyachid ela dumya de shayara. So the first Rabbanan said, listen, there's 3 categories. We have to distinguish between 3 categories. I'll show you the chart that I made. There's a shayara, meaning you're out in the wilderness, and that's a rabbim, 3 or more people. That's a shayara. So you have it's a caravan. He's on the road. Then there's something called yachid baderech, an individual on the road. And then you're be'ir, you're in the middle of the city, whatever. Okay? So the Bartunera says the following. The difference between the 2 Rabbanans are that the first Rabbanan, lo shara liyachid ela dumya de shayara baderech, an individual on the road, he is permitted to do 1, o shti o erev. Ho'il ve'er yachol lasot mechitza ru'uya, since he can't make a nice mechitza. V'lo ba'yishuv. But not in the yishuv, in the ear. I should probably change that, to use the Mishnah's term. Ba'yishuv. Ba'yishuv. Okay. V'Rabbanan batrai, but the second Rabbanan said, echad mishnei dvarim. 1 or 2 possibilities. Bein liyachid, bein lirabim, bein bederech, bein ba'yishuv. So let's go all 4 together. Let's see all 4 positions. The first Chachamim said, if you're in a shayara, then you can use echad, kaneo chavadim, shti o erev. If you're a yachid b'derech, also the same thing. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda said, no, only a shayara. So remember we said, Rabbi Yehuda said, if you're in a shayara, you can use one, kanimo chavalim. But he said that's only a shayara, as opposed to a yachid b'derech, or in the yishuv, you have to have both. Whereas, and then the Rabban the Chachamim said, lo dibrele bahoveh, i.e. the Bartidara says, that means you could use kanim and chavalim, one or the other, whether it's on the road, rabim b'derech, or a yachid b'derech. But the first Rabbanim would say, if you're in the yishuv, if you're in yishuv, you have to build a normal fence. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda said, let's go back to the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda said, kol mechitza she'ena shel shti v'shel erev ena mechitza. So he held it's not a mechitza in any case, whether you're in the shayara or yachid or for sure in the yishuv. And the last chachamim said no. The last chachamim said echad mishnei dvarim. You only need one or the other, and I don't care where you are, whether you're in the shayara, in the derech, whether you're an individual, or even in the yishuv, it's a mechitza. So it's what you have, interestingly, a very interesting, once you see it in chart form, I always love to see it visually, because once you see it in the chart form, then you see the fundamental machloket. So the fundamental machloket is Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda against the last Chachamim. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, listen, shtiva arev is the only kind of mechitza. Without a shtiva arev, if you don't have both shtiva arev, it's not a wall. It's a bunch of reeds stuck together. It's a bunch of reeds placed together. People can get through that. It's really true. You can push your way through. It's not considered a boundary or a border. Whereas the Chachamim, and therefore I need a real border in order to make my Eruvin, or to make my enclosure. On the other hand, going back to the chart, the Chachamim said, no, one is enough. You don't have to create an actual physical border. It's a halachic border. So therefore, either one or the other, that's fine. And they apply their rules universally. Then you have the different gradations. And the first, then Chachamim Kama, they say, listen, okay, they say the Chachamim Kama are actually closer. One second, I'm sorry. The Chachamim Kama say, listen, I'll agree to you that it's not ideal, but it's certainly a mechitza, and therefore anybody on the road, anyone, whether yachid or rabim, they can use one. Kanim o chavalim, okay, shati o arid. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda would say, no, I take a different position. If you're an individual, you have to be more meticulous. We're only makil for rabim. So once you see this, you see it would be more interesting. I actually put this in the direction of in the order of the Mishnah. But it'd be more interesting if Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda down here, you would just see the gradations in the color of how each position holds. Let's read the rest of the Mishnah. Arba dvarim patu b'machaneh. So we're talking about a machaneh. A machaneh is a military camp. That's the Bartidara says. Machaneh liotzim milchama. So there were certain kulot, afilu l'milchemet harashut. The Chachamim gave certain leniencies for soldiers who had to go out and make a military camp. One, mivi'im eitzi mikol makom. They're allowed to take wood from anywhere. Meaning, even if people cut down wood, and even if the people tied it up already, the military camp, it says, Ein chosheshim shum gezel. They were allowed to take for whatever reason. Okay? They were allowed to do that. Let's read the other ones. Upturim mechitzat yadayim. They are patur from tzilat yadayim before the meal. The Bartidara says, though, and after the meal, they're still chayav, because Chazal said that Mayim Achronim was a chuvah because they felt it was a potential physical danger. Melach's domit, but that's another discussion. Umi Demai. Demai, remember, we learned it was produce you bought from the Nama Aretz. And it was a suffix, Chazal said it was a suffix, whether they took off Truma, and they took off Trumat Maaser. So, therefore, they made a chumah that said you have to take off, again, Trumat Maaser, etc. So, in the military camp, they were allowed to eat from Demai. Umi Le Arev. And they also didn't have to make an Eruv Chatzerot. Let's look at the Bartidara for a second. They didn't have to make Eruv Chatzerot. From one oil to another in the machaneh, that's mukaf mechitzot. But I think that's the hard part. So he says once you have your machaneh, once it's surrounded, then you don't have to make the actual eruv. You don't have to take the food, which is I don't see what the big deal is. That's not so hard. One more thing I want to point out: the Bartidara adds a very important point that this kula that you're allowed to make the mechitzot was only what's called a beit sa'atayim in the area that you were able that you could plant 2 sa'ah. It would take to plant 2 sa'ah produce, which is Shivim Amah al Shivim Amah, which is 2 sa'ah was 5,000 square amot. So it was a little more than 4,900. So you couldn't make an enclosure larger than 70 square amot, more than that for an individual, more than Beit Satayim. On the other hand, if you're a shayara, if you are a community, if you have more than 3 people, you could make it as large as you want. we'll stop here. As always, if you have comments or questions, it's a little bit of a confusing Mishnah. I hope I made it clear. If you have comments or questions, feel free to email me at, people actually do that sometimes, artswalter@gmail.com. And we'll dedicate our learning to the memory of my father, Rav Simchat Ben Yitzchak Kalman. Have a great day.